Hi everybody, and welcome to the latest VodCast from Honors Biology at Desert Ridge High School. I'm Mr. Galladay, and today we're going to be talking about energy in ecosystems. This is concepts such as food chains, food webs, energy pyramids, and so on. This is a good place to update your table of contents and the organization in your notebook, because here we go. First thing we're going to talk about is the sun. The sun is the basis of all energy the basis of all energy of life on Earth. The process of photosynthesis is where plants are able to use the energy available in sunlight to convert inorganic carbon dioxide and water into glucose, and oxygen is produced as a waste product. This forms the basis of all food chains. It's the basis of all food webs, and it's extremely important for all life on Earth. Another concept that I want to review real quickly before we get going are these things that we call the levels of organization. Molecules and organelles, of course, are the basis that make up cells. Cells are the very lowest level of organization that have all the characteristics of living things. Cells are able to reproduce, they are able to use energy, they evolve, they are able to maintain a stable internal environment by the process of homeostasis, all of those characteristics of living things. Above cells, when you have a bunch of cells organized together into multiples, we call that tissue. When we have several different types of tissue working together, we call that organs. When we have several organ systems all working together, we call that an organism. Organism is the level that, of course, we are as individuals, and so that's the level that we are most familiar with. But above the level of organism, we have populations and species. When we have several organisms of the same type, we call that a population that are able to reproduce in a particular place. We call that a population. Above that is a community. That's all the living things in a particular area, all the different plants, all the animals, all the bacteria, all the fungus, and so on. When we take all of the living and non-living aspects of a particular place, we call that an ecosystem. So that includes the amount of rainfall, the amount of sunshine, all of the different the non-living aspects of the particular place. And then lots of ecosystems all go together to make up the biosphere. These three levels are the levels that we are most often concerned with in ecology. We're looking at usually the ecosystem level, the community level, and the population or species level. These are what we're going to be talking about in the coming unit. Okay, so we started off talking about photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is what defines these organisms that we call autotrophs. So things like these corn plants, anything that can produce its own energy by sunlight, we call that an autotroph. If it can make glucose or make its own fuel, then we call that an autotroph. Another term for these are producers. They produce all of the energy in the ecosystem. Now, one of the things that you might not realize or you might not be aware of, that plants do use energy. In fact, most of the energy that plants produce by photosynthesis is used for their own needs. Now, you might be wondering, well, what the heck does a plant do to use energy? They don't seem to move much, but in fact they do. Look at from growing from this little corn seedling or corn seed up to the seedling, all the way up to this large plant that required a lot of energy. In addition, these plants had to pump water and nutrients from the roots up to the against gravity up to the other parts of the plant. It also had to produce several nutrients against their concentration gradient. That all of those things required energy. So that 90% of the energy that was produced by photosynthesis is used up for its own needs. About 10% of that energy ends up being stored in the form of starches, lipids, sugars, and so on. So to use an example using numbers, if this plant produced 100 calories of glucose from photosynthesis, in order for it to grow into a larger plant, it's going to end up using 90 of those calories, right? So 90% of that energy was burned or was used up in the process of growth, cell maintenance, and so on. About 10% of, or 10 calories out of that original 100 were stored in the form of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and so on. All of that that material that was produced in photosynthesis can be recombined in different ways inside the cell by all those different enzymes. Now, anything that is stored in a plant is now available to be eaten by a consumer, right? A primary consumer or an herbivore. Anything that is able to or is not able to photosynthesize, that has to eat other organisms for their own energy needs, we call a heterotroph. So in this case, dogs, plants, butterflies, and I guess that's a sea monster. Anyway, all of those things have to eat other organisms for their energy needs, and we call those heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are called consumers because they have to consume things in order to get their energy. Now, consumers that eat producers are either first-order consumers or primary consumers. Those we sometimes call herbivores because they are plant eaters. So the cows, the pigs, and the chickens, all of these are herbivores, primarily herbivores. So they are plant eaters, or they are first-order consumers. Now, as you might have guessed, most of the energy that these organisms consume is used by their own needs. On average, about 90% of the energy that they consume is used by the consumer. The other 10% gets stored as fats, lipids, and so on. So this little piggy out doing laps in his pool, he consumed 100 calories of corn for breakfast. Out of that 100 calories, he's burning 90 of those calories in his daily activities, swimming laps in his pool or whatever it is that little piggies do all day, growing into a larger piggy. But that also took some material. He stored that 10 calories out of that 100 were stored as fat, muscle, and other tissues in his or her body. A consumer that eats another consumer for energy is called a secondary consumer or a second-order consumer. These could be carnivores, they could be omnivores. They may acquire this energy by being a predator, a scavenger, or a detritivore. All of these three down here refer to ways in which the consumer gets its food. But these refer to actually what it eats. We'll see examples of each of these. Now, from these second-order consumers, again, most of the energy that they consume in the form of food, they use for their own body needs. So in the case of these happy people, they're doing jumping jacks or whatever it is they're doing, and that's using 90% of the energy that they used for that they consumed for fuel. About 10% of that energy is going to be stored as fat, muscle, other body tissues. Now, those people apparently went to the beach and got eaten by a great white shark, and the shark in this little example would be a third-order consumer or a tertiary consumer. That could be a carnivore, as the case of this shark, or it could be an omnivore, a predator, probably in the case of this shark, although sharks do get a lot of food, I'm sure, from being scavengers. But the bottom line is it is a third level or a third order consumer because it consumed something which previously consumed an animal. So omnivores refer to the diet of an organism. Most humans are omnivores because we eat a mixture of plant and animal material. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. However, if you are a vegan, then you are strictly an herbivore. You are strictly a first-order consumer. If you are a consumer that hunts and kills their own prey, that would be a predator. The animals that you hunt and kill would be called your prey. On the other hand, if, like this turkey vulture, you are a consumer that eats other animals by basically finding things that have already died, then we would call you a scavenger or a detritivore. A detritivore refers to something that eats detritus, which is just sort of generally consuming, just generally decomposing stuff, a mixture of plant and animal material. Now, the transfer of energy from the sun to the primary consumers, to the secondary consumers, and the third order consumers, and so on, is called a food chain. Now, one of the things that is important to understand about food chains is that much energy is lost along the way. So this would be a food chain that includes grass and plant material, insects which are eating the plants, amphibians, in this case frogs, which are eating the insects, and some kind of a hawk which is eating the frogs. So here we have a whole chain of consumers. All of them are, their energy needs are coming from the producers. That's why we call them producers, because all of the energy needs ultimately start with that little meadow of grass. Now the sun provides the energy for the plants to produce grass through photosynthesis, the plants to produce sugar by the process of photosynthesis. Most energy which is acquired at each level in the food chain is used up. So as we saw the plants, most of that energy is being used in their own needs. 10% is being stored. 10% is now available to those higher order consumers. So of these grass, of the grass that's photosynthesizing under the sun, 90% of that energy is being used by the grass's own needs. 10% of that photosynthesized sugar is now available for the grasshoppers to use. Okay, of the energy that the grasshoppers consume, 90% of that is used up by the grasshopper's own energy needs. 10% is available to be passed on to the frogs. So what you're seeing in each step here, 90% of the energy consumed at that, we call these trophic levels, right? This is the first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, and so on. Each trophic level is, most of the energy is being used, is being burned by that particular organism, or the organisms at that particular trophic level. Another way of showing this transfer of energy is what we call an energy pyramid. The energy pyramids show that it takes a large number of producers to support a smaller number of consumers at each level. That is to say, it takes a very large amount of grass to produce enough energy to keep all these bunnies alive. To keep all the snakes alive at the next level, it takes a lot of bunnies. To keep all the hawks at the very top level that are eating the snakes, it takes a very large number of snakes. So in order to keep just one of these hawks alive, it takes an awful lot of grass, because so much energy is lost at each level. So another way of saying this is that the pyramid is small at the top because all of these supporting layers must be large to support that one particular hawk. So the base of the pyramid is large, the peak is very small. So this is saying that it takes a large number of consumers to support, a large number of producers to support the consumers at each level. So that's because the total amount of available energy decreases as we move up the food chain. Energy is lost at each level of the food chain. Okay, so our producers, we need lots of producers to support first order consumers. We need lots of these guys to support these guys, and we need a fair number of these to support the top level or the third order consumers. That's because energy is being lost as we move up the pyramid. Another way of showing these complex food relationships is in what we call a food web. These are all interconnected food chains, and they show the feeding relationships within an ecosystem. Now, this is because most consumers require many different food sources to support them throughout the year. The things that may be available in the summer for a consumer are not available in the winter, or vice versa. So a consumer needs many different sources of energy. Now, this is a very simple diagram showing a kind of a hypothetical food web situation. When we look at these in the real world, we see that they are very complex indeed. This is an ocean food web, and you can see by looking at this that when we take real organisms into account and we kind of examine how these different things rely on each other, the food web gets very, very, very complicated very, very, very rapidly. And again, this reflects the fact that most consumers require many different types of organisms to support their energy needs. Well, this is where I'm going to hold it up. This is Mr. Galladay for Honors Biology at Desert Ridge High School, and I hope you have a great day.